That's I
On
love
to
it.
Ed Essential.
That's a strong start. That's a strong start. Yeah.
What is our
Sorry,
hashtag?
I have my can of Coke.
No problem. So we're live now, just to gather us all together. When you last were here, I pushed the question, what is your essential if it's not the students? Now, in the ensuing kind of like maybe slight confusion or Clough, your heart's in the wrong place, kind of feeling I was getting, I got some pushback because I put it to some of my colleagues.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And they don't know me that well in the school that I'm in. Like, I'm new. I just started in September, but some people are starting to get my feel a little bit. And I'm actually going to be doing a podcast talking to one of the teachers at the school coming soon. Dude, that really fascinates me. So they're starting to get like a sense of I have like this alter ego, which is okay. But I put it to a few people and I said, I'm curious. I'm curious about what would you say is kind of at your core? What would you say is essential for teaching if you sort of just shift students just to the side for a second? And not one person would answer it. One person, it really made them, I think, well, you know, me, it's not me. It's not the question. It's me. I made them uncomfortable in asking that question. It's not just like we're walking down the hall and like, hey, Clough, hey, Joe, tell me something. I didn't kind of play it that.
What's essential?
Yeah, what's essential? What's essential? What's your essential core in teaching? And don't say students. But I've really messed with my own mind with that. And I've started to realize for me, it's a foundational question that could shift what I'm doing in teaching and how I'm doing in teaching.
By how you're doing, you mean like your own measure of success? Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know if I looked at it as success. Maybe just according to method. So my methods of the things that I tell myself are you know, when jobs change. So what am I building towards here? Am I building towards something? Is there sort of like a goal in mind in addition to doing the best job that I can with the students that I have in front of me? So pulling the students into soft focus for a second and looking at what are the other sort of sparkly pieces that are around that. I haven't been able to really let that go. And I haven't come to an answer either. Like, I think I've messed myself up more than I did the people walking in the hall. So
but I feel like that's part of it, is when you ask these questions of yourself, like it's meant to mess you up, because that's what causes any, you know, that's what causes your paradigm shifts.
And I also find and maybe you're like this, I can't do it in a vacuum. Like I have to what's the best way I could put this? I can remember when I went to OISE for Teachers College, and in the great big hall, I don't even remember but it's right across from the stadium. So that main building that's right across from the stadium that may or may not be there anymore, sitting in the great hall. And then there's somebody talking. I'm really far away. I'm like nosebleed seats all the way in the back. And I get kind of like distracted for a second. I'm like, why is my butt vibrating? And I'm sort of looking around. I'm sort of looking at other people too. I'm like, and no one's like, am I having an event or something? And then I find out afterwards that the subway goes right underneath the building.
Yeah.
But I had driven into school that day. I had no clue that the subway. So I was having kind of like something was going on. It was kind of a fact, because I think that's what I do when I ask questions. People are kind of like, did he say something? What did he say? What's going on? And then until they kind of say it's Clough. Oh yeah, Clough. And that's what. And if I can't get the question out to someone, then it kind of. I was really kind of bugged that I couldn't find someone to talk to. So, Story, if I have a little bit of the crazy eyes today, because I didn't get any satisfaction on that. I had no closure. So someone lead us off. Someone get the paddles in the water. Let's get us moving.
So I guess I can jump in a little bit. So it's funny when you talk about this essential, like what's essential in education. There's actually a teacher, and so I teach in a 7-8 school, but we're actually in like a high school building. And so there's this one teacher that I chatted with a lot last year, and for him, like everything sort of revolves around like Dewey's philosophy and everything that had to do with like with this process of making meaning. And so everything came down to that. So for him, like if he was to answer this question, he would probably say meaning making is what's essential for him. And so he actually kind of posed that same question to me and was like, if you had to distill what you are passionate about within education and within teaching and what you want your kids to grasp at the end of the day, for me, it was design. And so, and I like that because it was, I can think about the physical design of the space. I can think about the design of the curriculum. I can think about the design of anything really. But for me, I think that's what it comes down to.
That's your essential thing? Is that where you're sort of like, that's It's
almost more of a one word. Hey, Chris, just before we keep going, did you send out the link?
Oh, crap.
I was probably sitting there being like,
you know who I sent it to? You know who I sent it to? Oh, wait. Now, when I send out the link, this is always interesting. Oh, here, down here. Oh, there we go. I'll post it. While I do this, Zita, what's your thing then? Did we ever get to this? So Catherine, it's design.
Mm-hmm.
Zita, it's should we just do it as one word? Oh, I like that.
One word is hard though. How could you?
I
guess the one word is innovate, but I don't know. I feel like that's too loosey goosey.
So is that okay? So is that where this? Are you feeling like you're like that sort of you're not measuring up to our book study, or is that just you personally saying like you feel like you're not crystallizing it enough?
I think I like that piece where they talked about. Not that I agree, I could pull it off, just so we're clear. But on page 111, when it talked about selecting, and it said having the opportunity, and then having like your minimum criteria, and then your extreme criteria. That was kind of standing out to me, because I think for me, I want to see that reflection back to students. I know that that's one piece. I want to be able to have creative freedom. And I think I can articulate that now, but I couldn't before. And I think that's why sometimes I liked how that was brought up in that last chapter around selecting, is that when opportunity knocks, it's not about saying no to every opportunity, but to have clear criteria that guides you. I don't know if I ever have made criteria that would fit under the extreme category, though. I've never been that selective. I am like reading these chapters was kind of comical, because there were moments like the waking up in cold sweats has happened this year. And then taking a year off sounded pretty amazing.
And dude, you and I talked about that.
I tried.
There was a little convo that we had. So let me ask you then, because that was a digi convo.
Yeah.
Was that a blip?
Digi convo.
I actually did try to put the paperwork through. I was humming and hawing both ways, which was huge for me to even take that step. And then when I went to look at the paperwork, I needed a detailed plan.
You needed a detailed plan
to take an unpaid leave.
Like what kind of plan? Like they wanted to know what they were doing?
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess you don't want a conflict of interest. But I guess I didn't plan that in my head. In my head, I was planning on letting go and taking that risk and thinking about possibilities. And it's just timing. If it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be.
I wonder. Okay, I find this very curious.
Not that if it's meant to be. No case, Sarah.
No, it's just if things. I found out something fell through in January. So if that had fallen through in November or December, I probably would have been at a different point. But because that fell through so quickly and our deadline was the end of January, I couldn't have pulled it off. But that's okay. Next year. I'm not giving up on it, Chris.
Okay.
Because
my offer still stands too.
Okay.
The little part that I thought I could sort of live vicariously. I'm so like,
I'm sorry.
It's not happening now. That's okay.
No, I had come to terms with it all, and it was last minute. I got the paperwork. My one of my supervisors was really supportive, and then I realized there were 2 pieces I just couldn't pull off in time. But a bit of a bummer. But
okay.
I know that there are people in our board who are on like continual cycles of X over Y.
Yeah,
and it's like it's sort of built into their life.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I wish I planned ahead. I think that's my biggest problem there. And now I know I should plan ahead now.
Makes me think. Sorry, I'll draw it back to the book for a second. There's a couple comments in there, and I've heard this before. It's sometimes some of the big business support stories in here. I think I've heard quite a few of them. And the one that pops up a lot I've heard is the whole Bill Gates story about how he takes his, I think it's called the Think Week.
Yeah, I never heard that before.
Well, you
had?
Yeah,
I had heard. It one of those things that just kind of flows across the Twitter sphere. And often, what's remarkable to that about me, what's remarkable about that for me is that often that example, this book does a good job of framing it slightly differently, but the example is often offered in response to kind of like when you're getting off track, like a way to recalibrate yourself. And what I've always taken from this story is that it becomes like, Catherine, what you said, the X over Y. You're mapping out and saying, I need this type of refreshment in the career. So there's an intentionality about building in that Think Week. And that's, I've had a hard time arguing that this isn't some Uber plan that Gates has, because the dude's kind of successful. So I look at someone who's kind of successful like Bill. Bill and is it Belinda or Melinda? Melinda. So Bill and Melinda, like they kind of know what they're doing there. That whole like Microsoft's going to take off sooner or later. So they're solid. But I think to myself, there aren't accidents in their design. They're intentionally building these things that they know will successfully or in succession build a personal they'll have personal growth, they'll have professional growth. And what I often do is when that story pops up, because I've seen it in a couple different sort of think ed books, is I try and look at myself and like, what are you doing to sort of figure out this stuff? Like, how am I mapping out those with intention, the things that I need in order to sort of keep myself fresh and refreshed?
I think that was a big piece about this part, was just the idea of almost the idea of the power of rituals to stay focused.
Yeah.
Would that be a good way of putting it? Like, I think reading through that idea of play and knowing what we do that allows us to play with ideas, like I could really see how the more I take time to go take photographs or explore or even just go out for dinner with friends, it doesn't seem like child's play. But last night I was figuring out how to do a makey voting machine, which sounds really lame. But it's funny how in that playing and that back and forth, it's almost that illusion of time that we saw in part 1, that we think that being busy means we're more valuable. I don't know.
Yeah. I almost see, like, the more that I read this book, the more I think part of the difference between an essentialist and a non-essentialist is that one is more proactive and the other is more reactive, right? Like a lot of what the things that we're supposed to be thinking about in determining what is essential, I think it's building those structures so that we can make choices, not because someone else has, you know, forced them upon us, but because these are the choices that we want to make. So I think it kind of goes a little bit, Clef, with what you're saying with this whole Think Week, because like it is an intentional thing that I'm assuming that Bill Gates has set aside, knowing that he needs it. Not, it's like a last ditch effort to try and squeeze some creative ideas out.
I wonder though when he came to terms with that.
Mm.
Is that something he did after he became rich and famous? Before? And I guess that's why I liked how Greg talked about like the little things, like when he talked about reading something that had nothing to do with his work, the inspirational text piece.
Where was that again? I remember reading it, but
I think it was under now I have to try to was it under play? No. I'm trying to find it. My sticky note technique obviously is not working. Sorry.
So, well, let's
just after I bragged about it.
Let's real life it then, because I believe that too, and I've said that to I've found myself saying that in a few different spaces where someone seems to think of me like I kind of get kind of digital PLN stuff, and so once in a while someone will ask me and say, well, Clef, like, who do you follow that sort of does X? And I'll throw down like an artist's name or somebody that's kind of like, you know, a .comer or something like that. Somebody that's entirely outside the EDU bubble. And they'll say, but what does that have to do with assessment? I'm like, let me tell you. And then I can sort of like explain how I walked up to that type of distraction and thought to myself, so if we go back to the beginning of chapter 6, that first quote that frames it is, I don't know, I think T.S. Eliot or whatever, and sort of finding the knowledge within information. That's kind of like the essence of it. Like, how do you find knowledge within information? And one of the things that I find so consistently, I was actually walking, I was walking down I'll get back to my point. I swear, I've got it locked. It's right here. But I'm going to jump to this side of my brain for a second. I don't know if I'm doing that correctly. But this, am I doing that right? Is it the left side that's kind of like fireworks and the right side that's like, hey, calm down? Yeah. Could be vice versa.
Yes.
Am I right on that?
I think so,
so this side is saying, Clef, tell them the story about when you're walking down the hall today and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if all the acronyms have been used up yet. Because I'm seriously, I have this stack of stuff right now where I'm working through. So the program that I'm in right now, I'm supporting students, autistic students. So right now there's a lot of new documentation as far as my world as a cert, and even still I'm knee deep in some stuff, kind of re-reviewing Growing Success. I'm looking at a school effectiveness framework, like all these things that are just solely like, it's like you can't even go and look at the index anymore because there's so many more acronyms there that footnote to another acronym. So I'm walking down the hall with my stack under my arm and I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know, are all the acronyms used up? So now
I can guarantee you they're not.
They are not. So now I come back to this side and I say, what was I talking about again?
You're talking about finding the knowledge and information.
So the information that I constantly find myself wading through, I can't.
Makes sense.
I just don't. Yeah, it would maybe. Well, make sense is one thing. I can make sense of it because if I go longhand and reread everything again. But part of finding the knowledge within the information for me is a measure of portability. Because I only have a measure of how knowledgeable I am when I no longer have to carry the source material with me. And I have a little bit of a reflective practice where I say, if I can make it portable and it can move with me, then I've somehow touched on what is actually essential for me. by default. It's just kind of like a mental process. Now it could be like, well, Clough, you didn't even read chapter 3 yet. And I was like, oh, I'll get to that. But in short hops, this is how I sort of create this information that I say, this is how I can direct my next move. And I realized I so crave to be able to kind of replicate that process that often I move very slowly through trying to find knowledge within information. So one of the ways that I can kind of spark myself up is I got to get away from information. I have to get as far away from information as possible, which is why I'll go follow an artist or a skateboarder or a chef or someone that's just a poet, you know, and I need that. My brain, almost when it's in recovery mode from information, will remind me of what's important to me. Maybe not important in the big picture, but remind me what's important to me by becoming sticky with the new media that I absorb. But that's a hard conversation to talk about in PLN sometimes because it tends to be a little bit more deductive. Like, get me to that resource that talks about gradeless classrooms. Get me to that resource that, you know, about equity and FM&I. Like, people want, and I'm realizing I can go like this for me, but I have a hard time doing this for others.
Do you think people are doing that as an essentialist, or they're doing that because we are adding to the list sometimes?
The latter. It's listicle nation.
Because I think as you were talking, I was thinking of that whole, in the chapter when they said look, and they talked about the idea of the lead of the story, and how sometimes we look for so many of the little pieces.
I think that was the Nora Ephron. Was it the Nora Ephron? Yeah.
And I think that's the chapter 2 where she said, understanding the role the spider plays in the spider web, almost like all of the pieces coming together. I guess I love those moments. And to me, that is something that excites me, getting kind of like you were saying, finding that piece or that inspiration or that takeaway element that you can walk away with. For me, that was a lot of the art galleries the last 2 years, and the idea of curation and just how much we've learned to group, label, collect, and challenge our thinking through artwork that we haven't really done in person. But ironically, those moments have happened when I go out to play, you know? And not when I'm, I guess, So similar to what you're saying, I think a lot of the pieces came together. I think
the quote it had to do with Ephron in one of her first sort of writing classes. She had this aha in that instant. Ephron recalls, I realized that journalism was not about regurgitating the facts. I mean, we're talking, here's school. This is like right away. Okay. But about figuring out the point. It wasn't enough to know the who, the what, the when, and the where. Okay, so modern learning. You had to understand what it meant and why it mattered. Okay, mental wellness. And then into her commenting on her teacher saying, he taught me something that works just as well in life as it does in journalism. So this comes back to a question I think I asked last week is, you know, the things that we do that we perceive to be important, it's branded essential within our sort of jobs. Is that intentionality reciprocated from EDU to us? So there's if we're saying that us as teachers, what we're developing is just good practice for, I'm a mess in real life. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I'm like, I have to stay at school just so I have the bells go off. So I remember to do my 30 minutes of walking, right? I get home, I'm like, oh, let's have another sandwich, right? So I often think about how protective in some ways being at school is for my wellness. Like being told what to do is good for my health. Catherine, I jumped on what you're going to say, I think. Sorry.
I don't know. It's gone. Well, maybe. So I like this conversation around the play and just the having other things other than teaching, or like, reading outside of teaching, like having those other things, because I think that's what contextualizes things for me. And I actually find that most of the books that I read are not teaching, quote unquote, teaching related books, but I draw a lot of stuff from them because it contextualizes things for me. I don't know. Yeah. I like to live outside of the bubble, I suppose.
I feel like when I do it as well, there's something about it, like I'm building. It's kind of a weird mindset for me. I almost feel like I don't, when I'm told what to learn, when I'm told what to do, my automatic response is it passes through a lot of check gates. When I find something that piques my interest, my learning goes so much smoother. I find like I don't have the same, I don't want to call them obstacles. It's funny. There's so many things, not so many things. I find myself when I read things about EDU, and maybe this comes with the whole, when you do a thing for a little while. I mean, I don't know how I measure. So I've been teaching now for 14 years. I don't know if that's a little while or a long while, let's say in the grand scheme of things. But I feel like in some ways I've been doing it long enough to sort of be bothered when something is presented to me that I think that it's either dated or it's kind of recycled, or it's kind of a little bit of a bait and switch.
Or when you saw it 15 years ago and you're like, oh, now it's new.
I guess there's about a decade cycle on that, right? Yeah. It's that feeling like when you're driving in the car, you drive somewhere in the morning and then you get back in the car at 3:00 and it's the same playlist. You're like, really? Really? You start humming along to the song and you're like, why am I doing this? I heard this at 8 a.m. when I was driving. So this kind of effect that happens in teaching, it can happen, I guess, in any job as well. Stuff happens in cycles. But I've just come to realize how I put up these real immediate kind of, like I get hostile, like I get upset when I feel like I'm being, I almost hate to say this, I don't think I'll lose my job for this, but I think I don't like it when I'm told so much to do and I don't see it demonstrated as being done. Does that make sense? So it becomes highly theoretical. And I find often outside of EDU, here's the thing. It just arrived. Okay. The site kicked in. My previous job, it was so based on delivering a product of some sort. It was not service based, despite the fact it was in hospitality. You can say, well, that's kind of the service industry, but we had numbers to satisfy. We had to deliver, and we had to deliver at a certain level consistently. So staff had to be in that mind frame, management had to be in that mind frame. And often I get the sense like it's a page that I'm scared. I would be scared if school commodified it to the point that it does in like restaurants. But there's something really cool about people rallying behind an idea and going for it. And sometimes the theoretical conversations I get frustrated with because no one's actioning it kind of quick enough for me.
I think there's a great Simon Sinek clip that we used when I was talking to our administrators. I just dropped it in there. I'll tweet it out. Sorry. Okay. And I think it's one of the pieces. It's interesting that we're chatting because I'm trying to think what the connection is to the essential conversation. Essentialist conversation. He talks about the idea that we often focus on intensity versus consistency. And one of the reasons we focus on intensity is because it's easy to measure. It's the big moments. But that change really happens in those consistent small pieces. So he uses the example of brushing your teeth versus going to the dentist. Like going to the dentist is important, but it's a once or twice a year kind of big moment, and that your teeth are in good shape because you do the consistent teeth brushing every day. And I wonder how much, I wonder if that contributes to our essentialist conversation, and that maybe in education, we focus on those intense moments. And and we recycle them without acknowledging what that consistent small movements have been or small habits have been over time. But then I think even of the little things, like I think I love to travel, so I do the big trips. But when I look at that chapter about play, would I do better if I just actually got outside for 20 minutes every day? Or do I need to do the trip with the 20 minutes? You know what I mean? Like, am I focusing on the big moments? I think that's why I loved when he said reading daily alongside the Bill Gates story. Because the reality of me taking off a week and doing nothing but looking at data, which would not be exciting for me, but whatever. Or taking a year off, there may be things that I can do consistently that would contribute to that overall change effect. I don't know. The videos really stuck with me, and I didn't really put the two side by side till tonight. I'm going to try to tweet it out while we're chatting.
So consistency
it's
and intensity.
Intensity versus consistency. And he doesn't say that one. I think that's what I appreciated about the clip, is he doesn't say that one necessarily trumps the other. But that if you wanted to, but that effective change, he says he uses an example at the end of the clip. The clip's like 5 minutes, so I've pretty much told you the whole thing. He uses a great scene at the end of the clip where he talks about if you want to build a team, you can have a big moment, but he said probably the best thing to do would be to put away your phones and to have those conversations, and that those conversations over time is where the relationships are built and where the team forms. So, but he really talked about that fact that those are hard to measure. And I think in education, we focus on the big measurable moments. I don't know.
So when you're talking about the consistency, the first thing I thought about was the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi. Have you guys ever watched this?
I love that.
No.
And okay, so pretty much you have to watch this. It's like, okay. I think I really like watching food documentaries because I think there's something I feel like I don't have any experience in food. So Clef, maybe you can help me out here. But I think there is something about consistent practice, and like you can so Jiro, he is this old Japanese man who has essentially become he's done this thing and he's worked so hard to perfect his craft over X number of years. And I think I remember talking to my husband about this. I feel like in teaching, there are so many variables where I don't feel like you can ever get to that point where you really perfected it to the same way that I sometimes see maybe in food documentaries. This consistent, you work on just that, learning how to make the rice for 2 years, and you do it so often that it just becomes sort of second nature to you. And I feel like in teaching, there's not one thing where I would say it is so deeply ingrained in me, and I've so practiced it that I'm at that level of mastery. And I'm only I'm not 25, 30 years into my teaching career, but yeah.
Do you think that, and I'm not a cook either. Do you think that is mastery something that they feel they've achieved, or is mastery something somebody else puts on us? Because I think when we look at the true masters out there, they don't see it as they don't see their career as at an end.
And I don't think that they see it as an end, but I
wonder if we put that label on them, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I can see what you're, yeah.
I think that, when I watched that, I saw that documentary, and I've seen a few, and part of it is the process of apprenticeship and learning is something that, okay, I'll do this in a completely different. So there is no actual certification, let's say in Ontario, of being a chef.
Okay.
There may have been, there was a like a MasterChef kind of Canadian MasterChef level, but technically my card that I have in my wallet says I am certified in the trade of cook. So to play to your, is it the consistency in the practice? Is it the individual that has demonstrated the consistency in practice saying, now I'm a chef? Or is this what the other expects? Is it something that is an embellishment that the other puts on me in order to feel like they can trust me, that their money is going to be well spent, that there's going to be consistency, that they can depend on it? So part of what we're talking about now, do they need me to be the chef so that the relationship works? And I think that from the inside, when I think about when I was really, pushing hard to develop my craft, I was less aware. I was aware that there was a customer there because that is the other side of the relationship. But there were a whole lot of things that I did just to, like, type A, get better at it. Like, I think of the lengths that I went to get good at, to become what I felt was good at butchery. And it was a whole lot. Like, I was like, I'll cut, let me do it. Like, I was just jumping in and doing it because there was something in it that I wanted to get to a level of mastery that, and this is kind of like pre-Food Network as well. So my drive was, I was a little more intrinsically motivated just to get better. Now, on the outside of the intrinsic motivation was the external sort of like reward of keeping my numbers down. So I knew that I would get bonus if I was able to sort of like keep costs down. So to become a better butcher within the restaurant helped me. But there's something interesting about that my actual technical designation is in the trade of cook. And it's interesting to me that it's only within that particular trade that you ascend to a different title. Everything else, you get certification. You do electricity, you're an electrician. You do plumber, you're a plumber. You do constructor, you know what I mean? Everyone is, there's a consistent line over. But something with the chef, they've added in this extra layer of prestige. If I were to speak for, I don't know if it's Joe or Hero, I think what I saw, what spoke to me was an individual that was just focused on developing a deeper understanding, respect, and skill level, developing more skills so that he could do less with the product that's in front of him. Perfect framework for essentialism, so that the thing that he's presenting to the individual, the customer, is less changed, like it's minimally changed. And it's cool. I think it speaks, I mean, it could speak to your philosophical mind. If you're a foodie, the dude is like top of his game as far as sushi chefs go. And the shop that he owns is so unassuming. Like, it's not this big, it's not a mega sushi, conveyor belt sushi store. It's when you go and you sit, you pay a lot of money to go, but it's the experience. It's the experience, not just the experience, the relationship, and the skill.
So Barb had some things to say here, and I've been really bad at not paying enough attention. So she had, how could play make us better teachers? And she said, I think play would be a day off per week to brainstorm and experiment. But I think if teachers were given this day, they would probably use it to do marking.
So pause there for a second, because she said, so the question she asked is the first question, right, is how could play make us better teachers? Yeah. She closed the thought by saying the time would be wasted. So what is it about play that isn't sticky enough?
Well, she comes back to that. She says, still stuck on the idea of play. I once heard someone say that the definition of fun is learning.
No.
I think it was in the context of game-based learning.
I don't like that.
I do think, like, to me, I think the play was...
Sorry, Barb, I'm not. I was so like, that was so harsh. Sorry. Maybe I'll swing back to it.
I think what was interesting with play was that they started off with, I never say his name right, Chomsky, Flow, State of Flow dude.
Oh, that's a great name. Yes. I dare you.
Oh, man. Now I have to find it again.
Yes.
Mahai, I think.
I think.
I'm not going to say it. Flow dude is what I'm going to call him from now on. Because I don't know if I ever, as much as flow has been presented to me, and as much as I've experienced kids in that state of flow when they're designing a Minecraft or building a Lego world, I don't think I would have put play equals flow, which it does the way they put it side by side.
I think sometimes it does.
I think it's that adaptability and that flexible thinking. I like that idea of play when it said it broadens options and it's an antidote to stress. So I think sometimes we assume that play means as adults we're doing something so far removed from what anybody may consider to be work, where I think maybe it comes back to play is a fun work that isn't the work we're required to do. Is that?
I think where I get twisted on this, and I'll side. So part of the definition of play for me is that there has to be zero assessment. Zero.
Oh, that's
zero assessment. And I have, so my kids, I take them to the park. They go running off into the park. As soon as, and let's say they're playing and then they're playing, they're like so random. I look up, I'm like, what the blank are they doing now? Oh, okay, they're safe. They're over there. I talk to a friend. I'm like, oh, now they're on the other side of the park. As soon as you intervene in what you notice as play, you wreck it. And intervention happens at different levels of perspective. If I look up, if I hear laughter when I'm not paying attention in my children, as soon as I cue into that laughter, it changes what that laughter is about. There's a purity about the laughter when it just comes in filterless that I find I get so much more joy as opposed to when I start to categorize. I'm like, oh, they're playing with that kid and that kid makes them laugh. And that's why my daughter's laughing. And right away, I'm getting further and further into information.
The kindergarten teacher is kind of dying in me because.
So, but here's where I'm challenging, where Barb had said that planning is learning. Unfortunately, learning is couched in EDU. And this is where we end up sort of like the idea of play-based learning. I'm like, it doesn't work.
But are you putting your high school and middle school idea of assessment onto that idea of play?
No, I'm putting my fatherhood assessment onto play. So when I start to manage my children, when they are so obviously having fun, they stop having fun. When I jump in, unless I start, and it's interesting because I look at my kids' development of sort of like side-by-side play, parallel play, cooperative play, like the levels that they've gone through. And I will tell you, the play that gets closer and closer to organized, equitable, everyone's getting a turn, it actually moves slightly away from the fun center as well. Because you're moving into rules, whether it's societal rules or behavior norms. And I'm not saying like, if their idea of play is that they're like punching each other in the nose, like, you intervene. But I'm just saying what I've observed as being a parent is that the more that I intervene in the play in a way that I'm asserting some sort of clarification, some sort of moderation, some sort of information, it no longer is play. It becomes a lesson. And I can see it on their faces. They're like, yeah, we're having it.
But are you inviting them? This is I don't know if this has anything to do with essentialism. So I guess I watching Karen Callahan's clip around provocations or being a provocateur, or any of the work in the early years around invitations, I think it challenges us to not necessarily. I think there's some early years educators that would advocate for immersing yourself in the play instead of being the outsider that assesses. But I think the idea of invitations and provocations is so that I don't know why you said play and the assessment and now I'm lost. So Barb said play equals zero assessment ? Not formal, but kids are self-assessing. If what they want to do isn't working, they have to reassess and try something new.
are we comfortable? Are we comfortable with? And I like that, sure, because if assessment is just a natural kind of like human predilection, it's what we do. But but we're teachers, so assessment means something. It can't be as simple as just kids making decisions, because we want it, as you had said before, Tina, is like we're going towards this big number of something. I would like it. We're trying to move from this kind of cloud of experience into formal skill building. I love following Aviva Dunziger.
Yeah.
She posts up a ton. Like what I love about her captures on, I think I haven't checked in a while, but on Insta.
I think so.
I have this sort of like, I have this image of her in like camouflage teacher gear, kind of like crawling through the forest just to capture a conversation between two kids saying, you know what, the taste of mud really isn't all that bad. You're like, really? Right? And then part of it, so you have the audio and the video, which you can, like, I like to often, because I'll watch the video without the audio right away, just to kind of see what the activity is. Because in my mind, I want to experience something at a distance. I really need that distance just to kind of observe and see what it is before you get that next layer of information, which is the kids talking about it. And then if you really choose to pursue it, then you're going to pursue Aviva's posting and her team. I think there's a team there. A couple of them are posting into it. They'll put on this is math, this is literacy, this is art on top of it. But I really have a deep appreciation of the kernel of it, which is just being able to observe it without intervention. I often think about it like from an anthropological perspective, that, to sort of do that, impress upon, to go too quickly to impress upon the moment with my values and my understanding might mean that I'm going to miss something of the essence of it. I wrestled a lot with this when I was teaching hospitality. I don't know if I mentioned to you or I mentioned to somebody else, like I used to go around and stop the kids and ask them questions about what they're doing. And I would totally break their flow. So I had to find a way to let them keep acting, unless they're not punching themselves in the face, but maybe to cut a finger off. So this is high school. To let them keep cooking so they could stay in their activity and I could observe at a distance. So I had to figure out a method to get them to keep doing the thing that they're doing and not actually intervene. Because as soon as I did, it turned into a lesson and they no longer had fun.
We have to, I don't know.
So now I'm thinking about like all those times we ask kids to reflect afterwards.
But I think there's asking the question. I think of some grade ones I had. And so it is like one of the highlights. I can picture these girls in my head. We were coding dash and dots through a city. And they just went with it. So I was just hanging out. And one of the girls, she just went 2, 4, 6, 8, 80. And I just said, how did you know? And I think there's a piece, like she just looked at me and matter-of-factly said, this is how I know, and just kept going on. But I think it's the fact that I don't know, it's putting yourself in the situation and being okay with not nagging. I don't know. And I don't know how that helps us with our essential conversation, but I don't know how to bring it back. But maybe that's our problem too, is that we have so many rules to our play that we can't even figure out what our state of play is. If we can't.
So is play the same as fun?
But that's not, if we use that definition of flow didn't have to do as much with fun, but as in a state of release, which is what you're saying, Chris.
Uninterrupted engagement. Yeah. I look at that. Yeah.
So I think that's where you're pointing out that if we're jumping in, then we're probably interrupting that uninterrupted engagement.
When I just my phone happened to work this time, and there was yeah. So there's a quote here, say that one thing is certain: during play, animals are especially prone to behave in flexible and creative ways.
What was
So that's it could be Jack or Jaak Panksepp, and it's from I guess a book, Effective Neuroscience: The Foundations of Human and Animal Emotions. And it says that that I guess many animals do this, but of all animal species, it's humans are the biggest players of all. We're built to play and built through play. When we play, we are engaged in the purest expression of our humanity, the truest expression of our individuality. Is it any wonder that often the times we feel most alive, those that make up our best memories, are moments of play? Man, I got a long way to go in teaching if this somehow going to bring that one back.
I think that's the hard part, is we talk about it so often that that we don't actually experience it. We're so far removed from experiencing it ourselves. How can we bring to kids what we haven't?
Yeah.
What we forget? I don't know.
So what I find interesting is sort of on that same page, it says play expands our minds in ways that allow us to explore. And I almost think of it as like play. I think of play now, as I'm reading this, as something very pure. And then it talks about how it fuels exploration in 3 specific ways. And I almost feel like we play not so that we can draw something from it, but it almost happens as a byproduct. And I don't know if there's anything in that will help us define what is or isn't play.
Well, further along, they say the connection to essentialism there is that play reduces stress, opens your mind, and helps you develop executive function.
Yeah.
So if we use that as the 3 criteria of play, we can draw that back into our context and say, okay, so let's say play-based learning, does it click off on those 3 areas? Reduce stress, sort of open your mind, and help you work on, your executive functioning.
At the same time, I don't think that, like, I feel like, I don't know. I don't feel like if it's like, yes, play is an antidote to stress, but I don't think that that result should be like, it's not like a means to an end. It's not like play is a means to this end of not being stressed, Like, I feel like it has to be the reverse relationship where it's like.
But are we talking about like Stuart Shanker's about good stress versus bad stress kind of thing? Because I think that definitely comes in with flow, is that it's not that you don't necessarily struggle with things or tackle hard ideas or are stressed as you work through a problem, but it's that stress isn't the negative stress. I think the biggest piece I found with the essentialist conversation is just the idea that play, the time invested in play will have double, triple results in the end, right?
And I'm going to think that it's an integrated system. So whether it's good stress or bad stress, if the core of it is that play opens you up to accessing other parts of your executive function at a lower stress level, and your mind feels opened and the sort of opportunities are opened, good stress or bad stress is going to be sort of managed in a different way, right? I like this that has me thinking about, someone said to me, or I heard on a podcast or something, talking about plasticity. So brain plasticity, and we often categorize in that in a conversation that plasticity is always trending to the positive, but it's not positive or negative. It's sort of like a brain fact. It's just saying that if you have plasticity, it just means that you do have that sort of state of mind for growth and sort of expansion and room for ideas. Whatever you put in there, I mean, it can fall to the dark side as well, but just the plasticity as a fact is neither positive or negative. So maybe what's happening here is that fun as a fact is neither positive or negative. It's a state of mind. And as long as that state of mind, or sort of like that state of flow, is supported, you're going to have possibility for developing, accessing executive function. Like you're going to sort of have access to those pieces. But that kind of messed with my mind a little bit, because I've always been in conversations where we talked about plasticity being, you know, it's directed towards a positive thing. But it depends on what you're putting in there that sort of qualifies whether or not your plasticity is of any value. And I think what the podcast was talking about, that if at a young age, the experiences that we live through are terrible, well, that's where plasticity works against us, because those ideas all get in and there's lots of space for it. Right? Whereas the other side of plasticity, sometimes we talk about, you know, read to your children every single day in the morning, and you're going to develop space in their brain for that potential love of reading and sort of like expansion of vocabulary. So plasticity is dependent on what goes into it. Fun is neither positive or negative, but it depends on what you put into it.
Barb wanted to point out Einstein's quote on page 97. I think she said, "When I examine myself and my methods of thought, I come to the conclusion that the gift of fantasy has meant more to me than my talent for absorbing positive knowledge." And Barb says, in terms of essentialism, we often spend time doing inessential things when we could be mulling over creative ideas. I think that I live in that area right now. I think we're finally on the same wavelength. We're all saying the same thing. We need to end then. We're done. We've come to if we all agree. And I think that's a big thing, is whether you assess it or not. Either way, the idea of fun, the idea of play is that you're taking that time for your brain to exercise and to have that freedom.
Can I throw down something way out there?
Go for it.
So one of the things that what this made me think about, where it kind of pushed me, was the idea of scarcity. And there's a couple examples in here of people that were thinking very creatively. I figure what there was the wax nest, the wax. It was basically the baby warmer.
Oh, yes, yeah.
But I read that in Creative Confidence. Yeah.
So that idea of creativity and developing things, but I think often too, and I'll go back to watching my children play, is that if they're having fun and they're sort of, their energy is up and they're in flow, then that's the space. And Barbara, I'm thinking of you here. That's where the stick becomes the magic wand. That's where the playground becomes a maze with monsters. That's where the sky, there's sort of like, you know, flying monkeys coming at them, because it's kind of where the root of the creativity is having to use the tools around you to increase the fun. I think there's something there. And I like that idea of scarcity, where scarcity and constraints, to sort of come up with solutions and come up with ideas, because you have a very limited tool set to do it from. And I've been thinking a lot about that, in so much as what's kind of running out in education that we're not paying attention to. So certain items that, you know, these, because education, at least for my board, it's fairly resource rich, but I've started to think about the things that we might not have access to. Kind of coming back to what, let's say, is what are the essential resources for education? And I think this occurred to me when my
that's a good question.
When my laptop wasn't charged and I was in a meeting without a charged laptop. And it's a simplistic example, but what are the actual resources in education that they may actually be scarce already and we don't know it, or in the future they're going to become scarce and we need to shift. I was thinking that. And this book did this. I keep coming, because I'm taking almost like a very direct point as to, you know, what is essential. That's the knowledge that I'm pulling out of the information of this book. What is essential? How do I get to it? What do I need to get rid of in order to get there? And how many people around me are thinking the same thing?
And that's part 3, right? Eliminate.
Yeah.
So Barb says she sees you. I see you, Chris, just so you know.
I see you.
It's coming from the other side.
Cool.
So part 3 is about eliminate.
And I
cut out the
think
trivial.
I'm scared of this part a little bit because I think part of this book, I'm realizing that there is a trade-off to be had. You cannot take everything from this book and continue to live your life the way that it is right now. And so it's like it in essence requires you to give something up.
Which if you feel like something's coming down the pipe here?
I don't know. It's just like like
I'm gonna have to review the section again.
Yeah. I just have a feeling that it's, it's like you can be an essentialist, but there will be a
not but and
what will you eliminate?
Yes.
And what will you give up to get there?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not having cream in my coffee. I'm going to milk. Because the couple pounds around here is not essential. It's just below camera, but my arm is going across my girth. Yes. TMI.
So 2 weeks yesterday.
Yes.
Is that what we're doing?
Thank you for accommodating me. I appreciate that. I was happy to be able to come back and do the chitty chat.
So March 4th. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay. March 4th, part 3. We'll see you there, Barb.
We got to get Barb on. Like, Barb's got to come play for a combo at least once. Barb, the invitation's there.
We're really pushing Barb. Barb, this is pretty late for Barb.
Is it?
She's an early riser.
All right.
But maybe I'm making assumptions. She can correct me.
All right.
She hasn't. I keep refreshing, thinking she needs to tweet us back really quick, but no.
I'll do the bait next time. I'll send her the invite as well.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'll send her the invite.
Make it Eileen too.
It's who else?
Eileen. So unfortunately, Eileen was cutting up. She integer tiles.
Okay.
for a lesson for tomorrow, so she couldn't make it. But no. So
we'll see you in a couple weeks, friends.
Alrighty.
We'll chat in the digital hallways.
I'm gonna go work on that sleep chapter section.
I'm gonna go work on sleep. Yeah,
I know.
I'm gonna go work on
I have thoughts around that chapter.
I'm gonna wrap sleep around that chapter. All right.
See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.